So, let's dive into a question that sounds super simple, but oh boy, is it full of fascinating legal twists. When is income really your income for tax purposes? Turns out, the answer hinges on a single, kind of tricky scenario that's been tripping people up for over 100 years.
Just picture this. It's late on New Year's Eve. You finally get a check for that huge project you just finished. Awesome, right? But the banks are closed. You can't deposit it, you can't cash it, you can't do anything with it. So, is that income for the year that's literally seconds from ending, or for the brand new year that's about to start? The answer to that is the key to understanding a really powerful IRS doctrine.
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the core problem itself. Then we'll get into the legal principle that governs it, check out the classic court cases that set the rules, explore the all-important exceptions, and finally, figure out what this whole shebang actually means for you. So the IRS has an answer for our New Year's Eve problem, and it's a concept called constructive receipt. See, for most of us, it's not just about when you've got actual cash in your hand. It's about when you have control over it.
To put it simply, the rule says your income is taxable in the year it's made available to you without any real restrictions. And that word, available, is absolutely everything. If you have the right and the ability to go get the money, the IRS basically says, yep, that's yours, whether you physically touched it or not.
And this isn't just some vague idea, it is written right into the Treasury Regulations. The key phrase here, made available so that he may draw upon it at any time, well, that's the very language that becomes the battleground for pretty much every single fight over this rule.
So why even have this rule? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's to stop people from trying to game the system. The IRS doesn't want you telling a client, hey, can you just hold on to my bonus check until January 1st, just so you can push that tax bill into next year? At its heart, it's an anti-abuse rule, plain and simple.
And let me tell you, the courts have interpreted this rule incredibly strictly. A whole series of landmark cases show just how little wiggle room you have once that check is actually in your hand.
So let's take a look at a 1946 case, Lavery v. Commissioner. Here, a taxpayer got a check on December 30th. He argued, hey, it's just not convenient for me to cash it before the new year. You know what the court said? Not impressed. They ruled that once you possess the check, you possess the income. Your choice to wait? Totally irrelevant.
Okay, I hear you. But what about our original New Year's Eve scenario? What if it's not just inconvenient, but physically impossible to cash the check because every single bank is closed? Well, this exact argument was put to the test.
Yep, in Kahler versus Commissioner, a salesman got his commission check after 5 p.m. on New Year's Eve. He argued that this was a substantial limitation because there was literally no way he could turn it into cash that year. And you know what the tax court said? Nope, sorry.
And the court's logic here is actually pretty brilliant. They said a check isn't just a promise for money. It's a piece of property. It has real value the second you get it. You could sign it over to someone else, you could pay a bill with it, you can mail it to your bank. The court argued that if taxability depended on local banking hours, it would just be chaos. The rule had to be uniform. Check in your hand means income realized, period.
So, things are looking pretty bleak for our New Year's Eve taxpayer, right? But wait, there's a twist. Remember that phrase from the regulation? There's a critical escape hatch built right into the rule, and it's where all the most interesting legal battles happen.
The saving grace is for substantial limitations or restrictions. The entire doctrine really hinges on what the courts decide is substantial. As we just saw, a closed bank doesn't make the cut. So, what does?
The key case here is Avery v. Commissioner. A company, following its standard policy, mailed out dividend checks on December 31st. The taxpayer, of course, didn't get the check until January. The Supreme Court ruled that this was a restriction put in place by the company, not the taxpayer. He had zero control over the mail. Therefore, it wasn't income in year one. So, the Avery case cracks the door open for exceptions, but only when they're based on factors outside the taxpayer's control. And that leads us to a really fascinating case that tested a very, very common barrier. Simple geography.
Let's just put a number on it. Imagine your check is ready and waiting for you, but you'd have to drive 80 miles round trip on a weekend just to go pick it up. Is that just an inconvenience, or is that a substantial barrier?
This was the exact scenario in Baxter v. Commissioner. The IRS argued, hey, the check was technically available, so it was constructively received. But, surprisingly, the court disagreed. It ruled that forcing someone to make an 80-mile round trip on a Saturday just to pick up a check they couldn't even deposit until next week, well, that was in fact a substantial limitation.
When you put these two cases side by side, the fine line the courts have drawn becomes super clear. In Kahler, not being able to cash a check that was already in his pocket was just a logistical hurdle. But in Baxter, the significant effort required just to get the check in the first place, that crossed the line into a substantial barrier.
All right, so we've been through the rule, the super strict interpretation, and the rare exception. Now let's pull it all together into what you really need to know.
Think of this as your ultimate cheat sheet. Avery shows that if the payer makes it impossible to get the money in year 1, it's year 2 income. Lavery and Kahler show us that if you physically have the check, your personal delay or the bank's towers don't matter. It's year 1 income. And Baxter is that golden exception. A truly significant barrier to even getting the check can push it to year 2.
So it all boils down to this one question. At the end of the year, did you have unfettered command over the income? Was it available to you, where only your own choice not to act stood in the way? If the answer is yes, then guess what? It's income.
And here are the practical takeaways. First, the date on the check is totally irrelevant. It's the date you physically receive it that counts. And this is huge. It means if a client sends you a 1099 for year 1, but you can prove the check didn't actually arrive until January, you've got a solid argument to report that income in year 2. So keep good records. Maybe even snap a photo of the postmarked envelope. And remember, that 80-mile trip was an exception, not the rule. The barrier has to be truly substantial. At the end of the day, it all comes back to this one core principle. The entire doctrine of constructive receipt exists to make sure that you can't just pick and choose your tax year. The law, not your personal convenience, gets to decide when your income is realized. Which, leaves us with a final thought-provoking question. These rules were written for a world of paper checks and mailboxes. In today's world of Zelle, Venmo, and instant direct deposits, what could possibly even count as a substantial limitation? As money becomes more and more immediate, you got to wonder how this century-old legal battleground is going to keep evolving.